Some clinical situations call for that kind of impulse, but I have to keep myself in check from over-identifying or thinking of myself as a savior.
Right.
And kind of pull back and remind myself of who I am to these people. I'm not their savior, I'm their analyst.
Tell me a little bit about your own experience with this switch in venue, because I'm in plenty of therapy. I could tell my therapists were it was fine, but it was not what they were used to or
No.
prepared for. How did you find the whole switch with the pandemic?
Yeah, I found it unsettling, many elements of it. First of all, just going through such a monumentous event at the same time as all my patients, and then all the people that were also working on the show, all the participants on the show, like all of us were going through the same disturbing event at the same time. And there's like no hiding. It's like everyone's going through it and we're
Right.
witnessing each other adjusting to it, respond both similarly and differently to different threads of it, whether it's like the actual anxiety about the virus, like people getting sick, how do people respond to it? How much do people go into like fear? How much do people kind of adopt a more defensive attitude? So all of that, going through it together with my patients and with the participants on the show, was like a little different than the usual separation that you have between what people are talking about and what you're dealing with.
Right.
Here we're in it together. The boundary is more permeable between patient and analyst.
Like, I don't understand. Did you give Lenny a bath today? Because he seemed to be wearing the same thing as last night. Surprise, surprise! Not surprised at all, actually. Did either of them eat anything that wasn't junk?
I need you to engage with me in a way, because we can't have you just keep repeating yourself. I really get it. But do you want some help in changing things? Then add to that the fact that there's like lockdown and no office to go to. So I'm communicating with patients through screens or phone.
Yeah.
And everyone's at home. They're at home, that's fine. I mean, I'm talking to them when they're like in all sorts of like unpredictable scenes, like talking to me from a closet space, from a bathroom, with like shirtless with a baby hanging on them, people coming in and out of the screen, and similarly, them being in my home. So, they're like, wherever I'm speaking from, I mean, they can see what's going on. And I'm not like I'm not the type to tidy up every little thing behind me and think about all those things. So, like,
you're just living in it.
I'm just living, and it's on display, and which is kind of another change in the typical boundary between analyst and patient. And then just moving to this technology rather than being full-bodied in the office together, and with everything that goes with it, like that you have like a lot more information about each other through just being in the body. This funny thing that you have to like maintain this eye contact through the whole session.
It's very much, it's a lot.
It's a lot. I mean, typically in a therapy session, people are just like looking around, or they're on the couch. They're not looking at me at all. I mean, there's movement. Here it's just like zoom in on the face, and it's kind of two-dimensional. So it's been unnerving, difficult, a lot of loss of being in the room together, loss of travel time that you get to like prepare, think, process after, many losses. At the same time, also a certain kind of humanity and gain of the fact that we're all in it together. There's a certain kind of like lack of formality that I think certainly helps my patients, helps me, helps all of us going through this incredible challenge. Pluses and minuses.
Absolutely.
I don't know, maybe I'm just scared of being close to somebody, of giving somebody that
I gotta check on the baby. He's crying.
Giving somebody that power, I guess, of
committing to somebody in that way, you know, it's easier when you're alone. It's just you. You don't have to depend on anybody.
I remember long before the pandemic happened, I got a call from my therapist's receptionist one day and was like, oh, well, she's sick. She's not going to be able to come in. And I was shocked by how like shaken I was that I knew that she was sick. Like I had mentioned it to her the next session. She was like, oh, she shouldn't have said that to you. And now we're having these sessions where, you know, you're virtually inside each other's, they're on each other's laps. Have you gotten feedback from your patients that it's like, oh, this is that permeability is distracting? Like I know for you it's that way, but have you gotten that feedback as well?
I've gotten similar kind of mixed reactions. On one hand, I think there's like a shared intimacy that's created that I think has been reassuring for people, especially earlier on in the pandemic when there was so much about lockdown and separation and people were so isolated from each other. In that sense, I think it was reassuring and there was something kind of warm and, again, intimate about it. Then I also got all sorts of like, you know, sometimes snarky and complaining comments about sort of being exposed to too much of my life, which bothers people. And I don't blame them for it. I mean, they didn't sign up for that. They're working with a psychoanalyst. There's some idea of like really good boundaries, which is one of the good qualities I typically bring to the work, which is I like my boundaries and people enjoy that kind of work with me. And here suddenly, you know, things happen. People again walk into the frame. You know, my animals are around, and then people have been kind of. I've had all sorts of like funny comments about like things that people see in my background.
See,
like
some people aren't just staring right at you. Sometimes they're just looking at what's in your bookshelf instead of engaging.
Right.
So there's that. One thing I'm struck by is obviously that there's a difference between the first two seasons because we're all going through. I mean, not just the pandemic, but there was a lot of upheaval.
Yes, the Black Lives Matter, like the elections. It was
right. How do you think that affected people's therapeutic journeys? It definitely wasn't as straight of a line. It wasn't like you were sitting down, you were starting, and you were doing 20 weeks of therapy. I mean, there was a lot of turmoil there. Do you think your patients that impacted their journey to discovery?
Yeah, I mean, to I'm assuming we're talking now specifically about the couples
season
in
2
the series. Yeah. So yeah, it was very different from season 1 in many ways. One is, first of all, it was longer. The work took much longer. We spent a lot more time together than 20 weeks because there was like the before the pandemic, then the whole period that we worked remotely.
Yeah.
And then after when we went back into the office. So it was longer. It had more chapters in it. And the fact that people went through the pandemic and the lockdown was already this kind of like a burner put under the treatment that escalated issues and brought them to the fore a lot more. And then there were new issues that were introduced because of the pandemic, because of the lockdown, because of like changes in roles at home, kids being at home, people losing their jobs, people being, for example, I mean, Matthew and Johnny talked a lot about it, like Matthew ultimately losing his job, Johnny being not able to connect with his family in Italy. I mean, the pandemic brought up a lot of its own issues and exacerbated certain kind of issues and brought in issues that were not necessarily part of the couple's plan to work on.
Right.
And then, you know, I think the Black Lives Matter movement and everything that happened around the polarization that happened towards election season and then what happened right after, that changed many things for people. And I think in ways that we will still analyze for years to come.
Oh, yeah.
You know, I think as a collective, we all went through a kind of a deep crash course and reckoning with systemic issues of race and privilege. Right. So we all went through a deep learning experience. Now that changes us as a group. I think we're a different collective now than we were pre-pandemic. All of these things infiltrate into how couples interact with each other. And I think it had actually a wonderful impact on couples dynamics. It's as if everyone went through a crash course in how to decenter yourself from your own certainty in your subjective position. So you can certainly look at your position and say, well, I feel this way because, let's say, I'm a white Jewish woman of a certain class, and I'm aware of the fact that someone with a different skin color and a different class position might actually experience things very differently.
Right.
And that might be true about my spouse. That's profound. That's profound. I mean, years of work, of my kind of work, will not lead to what people have gone through just going through this past year that we've all been through. So yeah, a lot has changed.
I told you about something that happened at work today, right? And before anything happens, I said, this is something that I will have to reckon with Michal in some way.
Right.
It'll be a conversation or a decision to avoid a conversation or a way to tactfully present this.
So you have to spend a lot of energy managing Michal's anxiety. But what if your anxiety wasn't the ruling factor?
I don't know if he's doing that because of my anxiety. I think he's doing that just because he really loves me. He really just wants me to be happy.
That's exactly what you said about your mother.
Right.
That's really brilliant, that thought that like empathy for others can actually lead to greater empathy for our own partners.
Yeah.
I think that's really fascinating. I read in another interview that you did that when you talk about certain subjects in the room, particularly for patients who are on the show, there's less explicit talk about sex, about kids, about money, and yet general assumptions when you talk about couples breaking up is that those are the items that people will say, oh, well, you know, we weren't on the same page with this and this and that. Does it feel when you're in a session like you're not necessarily getting to the heart of the matters? Or is it that when people say that an issue is about sex or money or kids, it's really about a lot more than that is much more complicated to get into?
That's a great question. Yeah, well, I think a few different things. I mean, one, in response to what you're saying, one is just as you said, sometimes people they fight about one thing, but it's really about something else. Mm-hmm. Meaning people can fight about money, but they're really what's underlying the fight about money are issues of, for example, class or control. So you don't actually have to be talking specifically about how much money each person is making to be touching the real issue that's fueling that. So that's one thing. The other thing is that even if the issue is sex or money, you can work on it not necessarily by tackling that issue very directly, but by tackling some kind of parallel way that this plays out that will eventually lead to a change in that particular domain. It's all of these things are related. So you don't, it's just like when I work with couples, let's say a couple comes and presents me with like 7 really difficult issues. I don't have to actually address every of these 7 issues. If we do a really good piece of work on one issue, it might kind of infiltrate into how they deal with the rest of the issues. So you don't have to talk about everything. If you do real work on one issue, it'll permeate the rest. That's systemic thinking.
But are you confused by yourself?
Yeah, I guess you could say that. I mean, I'm confused as to why I'm crying right now.
Mm-hmm. Well, maybe you're crying because you're pushing away something that's good for you and you don't understand it?
Maybe.
That makes so much sense. And I mean, as I was thinking about it, I was like, well, we say sex is the issue, but is the issue really intimacy or quality time, or is it about control or and that's so smart. I love that. So I also this is very embarrassing, but it used to be when my wife would tell me about something that was bothering her, I would ask her all of these probing questions, like trying to get to the bottom of it and be a really good helper. And then at some point I noticed instead of that, I would just kind of sit with it and I would say more, like say more. And that would always have much better results, so I would do it more. Imagine my surprise when I sat down and watched season 2 and realized that I had ripped off Say More wholesale from you. What is it about a neutral prompt like that works so much better than kind of trying to drill right into something? Why did that work so well?
And why does that work so well? I think really what people need a lot of, it's not the only thing they need, but what they need a lot of is space to think. And when someone else is there creating the space for you and sort of accompanying you just by creating and listening and just being there in the most neutral way, you're offering so much, actually. If you probe by way and involve your own full emotional reaction, in a way, first of all, you're more busy with yourself than with the other person talking, but you're also, in a way, intruding on their process. And if you give a lot of space, people are amazing. People have incredible capacity to think through and solve their own issues. They need very little, even though this space thing is a huge gift. They need very little in the form of like ingredients like advice or empathy, or they just need space and accompaniment.
This is exactly what I didn't want it to happen. It's happened.
Which is?
This.
Because you projected it from the beginning.
I didn't project it.
Yes, you did.
1 second.
And I've been talking for weeks now about how you're not happy in this relationship. And here you are. You have to be pushed to the point where you come out with your true feelings.
Which are?
Because Matthew, it's always, I can't deal with him anymore. His sobriety, it's just,
because you don't.
I always have to, you know.
You don't seem happy. I don't look at you. You're not happy.
And that's what I love about you. That's what I love about the show, is like it's offering such insight to not only these couples, not only to human nature, but honestly to ourselves, to be like, why do I do these things? And why do they do these things? And how am I contributing to behavior that maybe I do or don't like? I'm always struck when I'm watching the show, and I just don't like someone. Like I don't like the way they react to things. They say things that upset me. And almost always, by the time I reach the end of the season, I get to a place where I have this empathy. I understand them. I appreciate the work that they've done. As an analyst, in the process, do you have those feelings? Do you get irritated by patients sometimes? And how do you balance that with also keeping an open mind and kind of an open heart in trying to help those same people?
So generally, I mean, I've been doing this work for a long time, and I've had like a lot of training, right? So a lot. So all this work and training generally leads you to a pretty, like, my stance sitting with couples is a relatively neutral stance, in the sense that, first of all, I'm not necessarily responding directly to each individual, but I'm really experiencing the couple as a unit, as a system. When you're responding to the couple as a system, you're less likely to get triggered by the individuals. You're really experiencing them as a system. But sometimes, I mean, that's sort of the general stance, but sometimes I do get pulled into a certain response to an individual. With, again, analytic training and the analytic work, one of the things we're trained to do is to witness and think through our own reactions as information about what's going on. So if for example, if someone is pulling me into a state of feeling irritated or bored, to me, that's not just an experience, it's information.
I totally imagine that you're trying to go like this.
Right.
I'm here to help you.
And it's like, do they not hear me? I don't understand. Like, and part of me feels like kind of outraged. I'm your therapist and you're like not listening to me.
Right.
For example, in the second season, there's a certain moment with Tashira and Drew. I did feel frustrated. I felt like Tashira is just like not working with me.
Right.
Like there's nothing I'm doing that I'm managing to like get her engaged. She's just kind of passively sitting there. I was noticing a certain level of frustration in me, and I was like, okay, this is information that will be useful for her to know that there's a way that she's rendering me kind of impotent, and I need to find a way to feed it back to her so we both understand what she's doing. If she's doing that with me, she's doing it with Drew.
Oh yeah.
This is about something. So what is it about? And luckily, working with Tashira, who's so psychologically minded and so sensitive in a way and willing to go there, she took it and did an enormous amount of work on that. She was like, yes, I get it. She got that feedback, worked with it, and made a decision to put herself in there more, and she analyzed her own reluctance. Your reactions of like not liking someone or whatever you're feeling, it's information about something that goes on there, that if you were in the position of the therapist, you'd find a way to make it useful for the couple.
No,
So-
stop. Think. Why are you hiding your smile? You're turning a smile into a smirk.
It just happens that way.
But you're saying that the inside feels the opposite, that you're happy, that you're noticing that Drew is offering you something special.
Yeah.
And you're turning it around into kind of a nasty response.
That's awesome. Like that's incredible. I mean, therapy's amazing.
Look, you know, countertransference, we call it.
Right. To that end, like you mentioned, you've had lots and lots and lots and lots of training as an analyst. And I think what moves me so much about that the show is that there are still moments where you find yourself reevaluating your decisions, like the video of the fight, the old fight between Matthew and Gianni. How does that make you feel, and like what were you guarding against? What were you keeping yourself from doing, I guess, just so we have full understanding of that situation?
Yeah, it's one of those moments, and they happen with patients, or with, I mean, with the show, we're calling them participants, not patients, but there are moments where you get deeply identified with what's going on, and sometimes too identified, you know, that there's a way, I mean, most people in this profession are naturally inclined to want to help. Right. That's sort of why we do this work. I mean, lots of satisfying things about the work, but there's also just the inclination to be a helper. But that can sometimes kind of bleed into all sorts of like what we call savior fantasies, like some idea that you will kind of swoop in there and fix something terrible that happened. And you can't do that. I mean, there's no way that I can, I mean, with patients of mine that were abused as children, I wish I could go back and like beat up on whoever hurt them, or, you know, make it go away. And there's no way to do that. I mean, some clinical situations call for that kind of impulse, but I have to keep myself in check from over-identifying or thinking of myself as a savior. And kind of pull back and remind myself of who I am to these people. I'm not their savior, I'm their analyst. That was that kind of moment where I kind of got pulled in too deeply and needed to do the work of like walking myself back.
I came home to 12 police car outside our building and him screaming like a crazy person. And when I walked into the apartment, it felt like there's been a war. The dogs were terrified, the door was broken, and the AC was on the floor.
That's so powerful. It is very moving to see these people showing up week to week and doing the work and growing, but also knowing that you are coming for every session and you're doing the work and you are also growing. I think that is one of the reasons that the show is so special. I've taken so much of your time and I appreciate it. So let me ask you one last thing. How can we all carry this collective spirit of empathy forward as restrictions lift, as we're returning back to normal life? How can we as a society sort of keep doing the work?
One thing is to not go into like whiplash. I think as a collective, we've matured a lot during the past year. And I worry about like the effect of like a boomerang effect of like suddenly like going all the way back to like polarization and alienation and forgetting these lessons that indeed we do all depend on each other. It might seem to you like you're doing one thing here and it has no impact over there on the other side of the globe, but it does. Similarly, our relationship to our partner, our relationship to the environment. I mean, there's a lot of good lessons to be had, even when we go back to normal. I just hope that people take this further rather than just regress right back to like where we were.
No, I think that's absolutely right. Dr. Orna, thank you so much. You're one of my absolute favorite people to talk to. I hope couples therapy runs forever, if that's what you want it to do. But yes, thank you so much for joining us.
Always a pleasure. Thank you. Bye-bye, Libby.